I often think about how our lives have been shaped by the limitations of money and the immeasurable riches of my mother's love. Growing up in Bangalore, my family struggled with poverty in ways that, to outsiders, might seem overwhelming. And yet, I never felt that the weight of those financial difficulties had crushed me. This was all because of my mother, whose perseverance and selflessness provided me with something far more valuable than money, a way to understand the world through education. We lived in a small house, one of those typical narrow spaces in Bangalore where rooms doubled up in function. The kitchen could become a study room, and the living area was also the bedroom. There were no fancy decorations, no shelves filled with toys or the latest gadgets. What we had was the bare minimum: a few simple chairs, a table where my mother sat in the evenings after work to mark papers, and a bookshelf filled with old, often dog-eared books that had seen better days. My father worked long hours, but his job paid little, leaving us always calculating how to stretch what we had until the end of the month. Sometimes even that wasn't enough, and I would overhear my parents discussing how they would manage to cover the bills or what they would do when rent was due. It wasn't easy, but my mother never let those struggles break her spirit, nor did she ever allow them to interfere with my education. She was an English teacher at a modest school, and though her salary wasn't much, it was enough to sustain us barely. Despite working all day and handling household chores in the evenings, she always found time for me. I vividly remember how, after a long day at school, she would sit with me to teach me English. I was just a small child then, and my world was limited to the few things that surrounded me. I didn't understand the importance of English at the time. To me, it was simply a language that my mother spoke so elegantly, a language that seemed to belong to people from faraway places, people who lived lives very different from our own. But my mother, she knew better. She knew that in a country like India, where English was the language of opportunity, learning it would open doors that could lead me to a life far beyond the one we were living. So, night after night, she would sit with me and go over words, sentences, grammar rules, and reading exercises. We didn't have the luxury of private tutors, expensive books, or special language programs. Everything I learned came from her endless patience and her unshakable belief in the power of education. I would sit at our wooden table, the one where she marked her students' papers, and I would practice writing out words, stumbling over letters, trying to figure out how they fit together. When I made mistakes, she would smile softly, never frustrated, always gently correcting me and explaining why I had gone wrong. It was as if she knew that her teaching was shaping not just my understanding of a language, but also my future. Those lessons went on for years, and as I grew older, I began to appreciate them more. I started to realize that my mother was giving me something far beyond grammar or vocabulary. She was teaching me discipline, resilience, and the value of hard work. The more I learned, the more I saw the world opening up in front of me, a world where I wasn't confined by the limits of our small house or the narrow streets of our neighborhood. Through English, I could connect with stories from across the globe, stories of people who had gone through their struggles and risen above them. And through my mother's lessons, I came to believe that I too could rise above our poverty if I worked hard enough. But it wasn't easy. There were many times when I felt discouraged. Going to school with classmates who came from wealthier families was often intimidating. They had access to resources that I could only dream of, private tutors, new books, and the latest gadgets that helped them with their studies. I, on the other hand, had to make do with old textbooks, sometimes borrowing them from the school library or relying on the few materials my mother could get her hands on. But she never let me feel less than anyone else. "Your mind is just as capable," she would say. "What matters is how hard you work and how much you believe in yourself." I carried those words with me everywhere I went. In school, while others had fancy supplies, I focused on doing the best I could with what I had. I would come home and tell my mother about my day, about the subjects we covered, the challenges I faced, and sometimes the doubts I had. She listened to everything with the same calm patience, offering advice when I needed it and encouragement when I felt low. She would remind me that education wasn't a competition, that I wasn't defined by the material things I lacked, but by my willingness to learn. And she led by example. My mother wasn't just an English teacher by profession, she was a lifelong learner herself. She constantly read, constantly tried to improve her own skills, even though she had been teaching for years. She never became complacent, never felt like she had learned enough. If she came across a new word or concept, she would immerse herself in it until she mastered it. Watching her do this made me realize that learning isn't something that stops once you reach a certain level. It's a lifelong process. I remember one particularly difficult time when things were especially tough financially. My father had lost his job, and my mother's salary, modest as it was, became our sole source of income. The pressure on her was enormous. Not only did she have to keep teaching, but she also had to manage all the household responsibilities and somehow keep our spirits up. I was old enough by then to see the strain in her eyes, to understand that she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Yet, every night, she would still sit with me to help me with my English studies. She would never let on how tired she was, or how worried she must have been about the future. All she focused on was ensuring that I kept learning, kept moving forward, even as the world around us seemed to crumble. It was during these moments that I realized how truly extraordinary my mother was. She never allowed the hardships we faced to deter her from her mission. Teaching wasn't just her job, it was her way of giving me a future. No matter how bad things got, she never lost sight of the fact that education was our way out. "This is temporary," she would say, gesturing to the cramped space we lived in, the constant worry over money. "But your education will last a lifetime. It will take you places." And she was right. As I continued to learn, my English skills became stronger, and with them came new opportunities. I began to excel in school, thanks to the foundation my mother had built. She had instilled in me a deep love for the language, but more than that, she had given me the tools to think critically, to express myself clearly, and to approach problems with confidence. These skills carried me through school and beyond, opening doors to opportunities that would have otherwise been closed. Looking back now, I see how much my mother gave me, not just through her teaching, but through the example she set every day. She showed me what it meant to work hard, to stay committed, and to never give up, no matter how tough things got. She could have let the weight of our financial struggles break her, but she didn't. Instead, she turned every challenge into a lesson, teaching me not just English, but also the values of perseverance, dedication, and love. Even though we were poor, my mother gave me the greatest gift anyone could ask for, the ability to dream. She taught me that despite our circumstances, I could achieve great things through education. And as I move forward in life, I carry her lessons with me everywhere I go, knowing that no matter where life takes me, I will always have the foundation she built for me. In the end, my mother's story isn't just about poverty or hardship. It's about resilience. It's about how one person, through sheer determination and love, can change the course of another person's life. My mother's lessons went far beyond the classroom. She taught me that no matter what challenges we face, there is always a way forward if we are willing to learn, to grow, and to believe in ourselves. And for that, I will always be grateful. As the years went by, I began to notice the small, subtle things that revealed the true extent of my mother's sacrifices. There were days when I would see her skip meals or quietly pretend she wasn't hungry just so that my father and I could eat. She never made a fuss about it, never called attention to herself. It was as though she had conditioned herself to place her family's needs above her own in every possible way. These were the moments when I felt the weight of our poverty most acutely, not because we didn't have enough, but because I could see how much my mother was giving up for us. Yet through it all, her determination to educate me never faltered. If anything, it grew stronger. No matter how exhausted she was, no matter how much pressure she faced from work or the burden of managing the household, she would always make time to sit with me and go through my lessons. Sometimes After an especially long day, I would tell her to rest, that we could continue the next day, but she would insist, gently but firmly, that learning was too important to postpone. She knew that every lesson counted, that each day I spent learning brought me closer to a future that might offer more possibilities than the one we were living. As I grew older, I began to understand not just the technical aspects of the English language, but the broader implications of what it meant to be educated in English. I realized that in India, English was more than just a subject in school. It was a key that unlocked doors to opportunities, whether it was higher education, a good job, or even social mobility. English was often the difference between someone being stuck in a cycle of poverty and someone having the chance to rise above it. My mother understood this better than anyone, and that's why she placed so much emphasis on it. But learning wasn't always easy for me. There were times when I struggled, times when the rules of grammar felt overwhelming, or when I found myself frustrated by the complexity of certain texts. During these moments, it would have been easy to give up, to tell myself that it didn't matter, that I could get by without mastering English. But my mother wouldn't let me fall into that trap. Whenever I was on the verge of giving up, she would remind me of the bigger picture. "This is hard now," she would say, "but imagine how much easier life will be once you've learned it." She had a way of making even the most difficult tasks feel manageable. She broke things down for me in a way that made sense, always patient, always kind. If I didn't understand something the first time, she would explain it again, and again and again if necessary. Her belief in my ability to learn never wavered, even when my own confidence faltered. And in that belief, I found strength. There was something magical about the way she taught, something that went beyond the simple mechanics of language. She infused every lesson with life, with stories, with emotions. When she taught me to read, it wasn't just about understanding words on a page. It was about stepping into new worlds, seeing life through different perspectives, and realizing that literature had the power to expand my mind in ways I had never imagined. When she taught me to write, it wasn't just about grammar and syntax. It was about finding my voice, learning to express myself clearly and confidently, and understanding that my words had the power to shape the way I saw the world and how the world saw me. As I advanced through school, I became more and more aware of the privileges my wealthier classmates enjoyed. They had access to tutors, study materials, and extracurricular activities that I could only dream of. There were moments when I felt out of place, as though I didn't belong in the same educational space as them. I didn't have the same polished accent, the same effortless ease with the language. I felt self-conscious, especially during times when group discussions or public speaking were required. But my mother was always there to remind me that I was just as capable as anyone else. She told me stories of famous people who had come from humble beginnings, people who had struggled against all odds to achieve greatness. She reminded me that success wasn't about where you started, but about how hard you were willing to work. And she was right. Slowly but surely my confidence began to grow. With her support, I learned not to compare myself to others, but to focus on my own journey, on my own progress. There were so many moments when I felt the depth of my mother's wisdom. It wasn't just her knowledge of English that impressed me, it was her understanding of life, her ability to navigate the complexities of the world with grace and humility. She had a way of making everything seem possible, even when the odds were stacked against us. And it wasn't just me she inspired. My friends and classmates who met her often commented on her warmth, her kindness, and the way she seemed to genuinely care about everyone's success, not just mine. Over the years, I became aware of how my mother's work as a teacher was seen by others in the community. Teaching is often considered a noble profession, but it is also undervalued, especially in environments where resources are scarce. My mother didn't earn much, and her job was far from easy. She taught in a government school where class sizes were large, and students came from a variety of backgrounds. Some of her students struggled with learning, others came from homes where education wasn't prioritized, and many had their own financial and emotional challenges. But my mother treated every one of them with the same care and attention she gave to me. She believed that education was a way out of poverty, not just for me, but for all of her students. She knew that many of them came from backgrounds just like ours, where money was tight and opportunities were limited, and so she gave them the same dedication she gave to me. She stayed late after school to help students who needed extra attention. She spent her weekends preparing lessons and thinking of ways to make learning more engaging. She wasn't just teaching them English, she was teaching them to believe in themselves, to see the potential they had within. Watching my mother in her role as a teacher gave me a new appreciation for the profession. I saw how much she gave of herself, how deeply she cared about the future of her students, and I realized that in many ways she was doing for them what she had done for me, showing them that no matter how difficult life was, education could be a path to something better. Her dedication wasn't just about the subject she taught, it was about the lives she was trying to impact. She knew that many of her students, like me, didn't have the luxury of private tutors or extra resources, but she also knew that with the right guidance, they could still succeed. And so she poured her heart into her work, never asking for recognition, never expecting praise. She did it because she believed in the power of education, and because she believed in the potential of every child who walked through her classroom doors. As I continued to grow, my appreciation for my mother's sacrifices deepened. I began to understand just how much she had given up to ensure that I had the best possible chance at a better life. There were times when she went without new clothes, when she patched up old shoes rather than buying new ones, when she saved every rupee she could to buy me the books and materials I needed for school. She never complained about these sacrifices. In fact, she made them seem so natural, as though giving up her own comforts was simply part of being a mother. Looking back, I realized that my mother's love was woven into everything she did. She didn't need to tell me how much she cared. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Every time she stayed up late to help me study, every time she put her own needs aside to make sure I had what I needed, every time she encouraged me to keep going when I felt like giving up, she was showing me the depth of her love. Even now, as I reflect on those years, I am struck by the enormity of her sacrifices. She could have chosen an easier path. She could have focused solely on her job, leaving me to fend for myself in my studies. But she didn't. She took it upon herself to be not just my mother, but my teacher, my mentor, my guide. She understood that education was the one thing that could change the trajectory of my life, and she made it her mission to ensure that I had every opportunity to succeed. Her lessons extended far beyond the confines of the English language. Through her, I learned about resilience, about perseverance, about the importance of never giving up, no matter how tough things got. She taught me that life would always present challenges, but that with hard work, determination, and a little bit of faith, anything was possible. And so as I look back on my life, I see the many ways in which my mother's teachings have shaped me. She didn't just teach me English, she taught me how to navigate the world, how to believe in myself, and how to keep striving for more, even when the odds were against me. Every achievement I've had, every success I've experienced, can be traced back to those quiet evenings at the kitchen table, where my mother sat with me, patiently guiding me through the complexities of language and life. Even though we lived in poverty, I never felt poor when I was with my mother. She gave me riches that no amount of money could ever buy: knowledge, wisdom, and an unshakable belief in my own potential. And for that, I will be forever grateful. Hope you enjoyed the reading.